today we are welcoming Carey McCallum, and I will let you kind of explain what you've been working on and the context behind this. But you've done some really wonderful study into disability in church, and specific to Trinity. We were kind of a case study for you, I think.
Yes.
So I'll let you talk a little bit about how this came to be and hand it over to you.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
So my name is Carey McCallum. Last year I was a student at Union Presbyterian Seminary, which is over in Richmond. And one of the courses I was taking in the spring was disability theology. And it was, the topic was interesting to me on a number of levels. I've worked with people with disabilities, specifically with young men with autism, and then also with I have family members who have mental illness, an older brother with schizophrenia, and I have a close childhood friend who has lived for the past almost 2 decades now in a institution with debilitating mental illness. So on a personal level, the class was the topic interested me, and like many people, I struggle myself with social anxiety, and so I wanted to learn more about how churches, how faith communities can be more welcoming to people with the whole spectrum of disabilities, and so that's what this is about today. This is basically my final project for the class. I've done a little bit of tweaking since then to make it more to fit better for this group, but that's basically what I'll be presenting. So there's sort of 2 parts to this. So the first part will be a little bit broader, kind of looking at the disability rights movement and disability more broadly, and then the second part will be looking at Trinity as sort of like a case study. And so after the first part would be sort of a natural part where we can pause, and if you have questions or comments or thoughts you want to share. I mean, if you have questions along the way, that's fine too, and we can pause. But we'll maybe have a lengthier discussion period after the first part and then after the second part. Okay? Great. Here we go. So, what is disability? This is actually, like with a lot of these words, we assume we know what it is, but there's more to it. It's more complex and controversial than we might imagine. But the sort of working definition that I'll be using is this. Disabilities can be physical, sensory, intellectual, and mental health related. They can affect mobility, communication, cognition, or daily living activities. So as you can see, that it does encompass everything from physical disability to mental kind of development issues, all the way to sensory type disabilities that someone with autism, for example, might struggle with. Disabilities can be something that you're born with, something present from birth, or something that's acquired later in life due to an injury or just due to the natural aging process. And I really want to emphasize this last point, that disability is normal. It's something that all of us, I imagine, have experienced on some level at this point of your life. Especially as we age, all of us will experience different types of limitations. In disability studies, you'll often hear that we are at best temporarily able-bodied or able-minded.
I can't see.
Oh, okay. So disability studies is a area of academic studies that developed in the late 20th century as scholars, activists, and policymakers recognize the need for a broader understanding of disability beyond mere diagnosis or treatment. It's grounded in the idea that disability is a social construct, much like race or gender, that is shaped by cultural and institutional structures. It challenges the idea that disability is an inherent limitation within individuals, and instead looks at how society disables people, but not accommodating different needs. So I'll go ahead and skip to the next. So there was a lot in that last slide, but this is sort of getting at this idea that disability isn't just, it's not only something about your body or something only about the way your mind works. It also has an equally important aspect of how society, communities, churches, how they perceive disability and how they respond to disability. So it's just as with race, where there may be certain physical characteristics, skin color, et cetera, that we can think of in terms of racial difference. But then there's also an equally important aspect of how society perceives those characteristics and what associations they make to those characteristics. And so it's sort of this multifaceted dynamic.
Yeah, that idea of society disabling people is really,
Right.
that's an important, I hadn't thought about that way of, I mean, just taking that verb grammatically and pointing out that is,
Right.
that is.
Yeah, it's
Well,
interesting to
that,
think
yeah.
about, like, it's not just the condition that disables,
Right.
it's actually the, us that
Exactly, yeah.
disable.
Yeah.
There's a number of different models of disability, and these are just 4 of the, I guess, bigger ones, but there are many more. The first one is maybe the most, like historically, the most prevalent. And this is the moral or religious model. And it views disability as a form of punishment for having sinned or being immoral. And so in a theistic context, this would be, you did something wrong and God is punishing you, or the gods are punishing you for screwing up. In a more Eastern context, it might be karma. You've done something bad, and so you have bad karma, and so you're born with this condition or something.
Or your parents
Or reborn.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We have an image here of a famous story from the Gospel of John, where Jesus encounters a man born blind from birth, and his disciples ask, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And so what assumption are they making with that statement?
Someone did something wrong, and that's why they're getting punished.
Right. So there's sort of this automatic kind of knee-jerk assumption, and these aren't just the crowds. This is the disciples who.
And there becomes a shame that's attached to
Right.
that, which is one of the outcomes of.
Right. Exactly. And does anyone recall how Jesus responds to the disciples in that passage? Does he agree with them? the priest can answer too.
Yeah.
I didn't hear the question. I'm
All
sorry.
right, so.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
So AJ, we're talking about some different models of disability. The first one being the moral religious model, where disability is related to sin, that is a punishment. And I mentioned the story of the man born blind, and Jesus being asked by his disciples who sinned.
He doesn't answer. He does the great thing. He doesn't answer. He says, it's so that you can see the glory of God.
Yes, right. So I think I have the exact quote. Well, no, that's your laptop. Anyway, yes, he says basically that neither this man nor his parents sinned, that his blindness is for the glory of God, or the revealing the glory of God. Now, I will say some people writing from a disability perspective, disability studies perspective, take issue with that, because there's a sense of, well, maybe I didn't want to be, blind all my life, so that Jesus could kind of shine in this moment, and so part of what disability, and we'll get to disability theology in a second, part of what disability theology does is look at many of these passages in Scripture through the lens of disability, and kind of ask those hard questions of, how are disabled people being portrayed in Scripture, and are there certain aspects that are problematic for us today from our lens? So there's a lot we could talk about there, but some more modern models, the medical model. This is probably the most prominent model of disability today. Considers disability as a condition to be treated, emphasizing medical intervention for improvement or cure. So, this is often how we talk about disability as being, a medical condition, and including mental illness. I grew up during the time when, I remember doctors talking about depression, for example, as it's just like diabetes. Your brain isn't producing enough serotonin, and so therefore you have a depressed mind or brain. And so it's viewing disability largely, if not exclusively, in terms of a medical perspective, which I would say has its benefits and its kind of shortcomings. And then there's the social model, which is I would say is where the disability studies movement is largely coming from. And this focuses on removing societal barriers to inclusion, arguing disability arises from environmental and social obstacles. So it's not about, the legs that aren't working properly, or the eyes, not seeing properly. It's more about how society has been set up, either to be, to accommodate people of all different shapes and sizes and abilities, or not. And then the biopsychosocial model, which is sort of combining these two together for a more holistic account of disability. So, any questions about those? Okay. Two prominent words or terms in disability studies, or normate, or the normate, and ableism. You might have heard these, maybe ableism.
I haven't heard of normate.
Yeah, so normate describes societal standards for normal bodies and behaviors, often marginalizing people with disabilities. those who are perceived as representing the normate can step into a position of authority and wield the power it grants them. So, if you think about, again, sort of comparing disability to racism, that in our historical context, for a long time, white males, for example, could much more easily step into positions of authority based on their race and gender than, say, a black woman could.
It's kind of the default, and so
Right.
it's easy
It's
for
considered
that authority
normal.
to default to.
Right, exactly.
And it's interesting, I mean, and there's so many aspects of our culture that are that way, introverted versus extroverted.
Yes.
Is a big one, that one came to mind, it just left me again, anyway, but, all of those,
Left-handed versus right-handed.
Yeah.
Left-handed versus
Yeah.
right-handed, yeah, those ways that we normalize a certain, image and then, design.
We just
social
assume,
structures around that and
this is how
then make assumptions.
things work, and this is what's expected. And so very much related to this idea of the normate, ableism creates barriers for people with disabilities, favoring able-bodied individuals and reinforcing stereotypes. Ableism suggests that it is better to be non-disabled than to be disabled, that people with disabilities are less valuable than people without disabilities, and that discrimination on the basis of disability is at best unavoidable and at worst not really a problem. So, so again, and a lot of this, just as with racism, many times people may be exhibiting ableism without being consciously aware of it, or without thinking of themselves as the kind of person who would behave that way. But because it's so ingrained, it's so much, it's sort of subconscious almost, we have to be very conscious, bring it to consciousness in order to not fall into it, because it is the norm.
Okay, I have one thing, but it's not
Yeah.
disabled, but it's talking about normate, and I think Kara might understand this. Grocery stores are built for a certain height.
All people.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's like where I'm reminded every time I need to get cereal,
Yes.
is that I am not normate.
Yeah. And and imagine, think about
Anyone who's
the way kitchens are designed for, kind of average height people, and so if you're, a little person or a really big person, then.
I think back too to the COVID pandemic, when there were those who needed to be more careful than others. And I think that brought home for me what was more difficult and less difficult in assumptions that were made about what was healthy and safe. That, I think those few years, perhaps for many of us, brought home those differences in
Yeah.
access
Yes.
and ability and vulnerability.
Yeah,
which is
yeah, for sure, and it kind of made us more aware of, those groups of people who had always been, had things a little harder.
Right.
But now, to some extent, we were all experiencing,
Yes.
limitations.
And then some of us even more so. So yeah,
Yes.
because of those pre-existing limitations, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, good point.
Right. So within the sort of larger umbrella banner of disability studies is disability theology, which is, you might expect, is kind of using some of the same perspectives and tools of disability studies, but specifically towards questions of faith, theology, God, church, things like that. There was a kind of a groundbreaking book, came out in 1994 by Nancy Iceland, called The Disabled God, which the title itself is sort of like, gets your attention. We don't normally think of God as disabled. We think of God in all the omnis, omnipotent all the others. But she, among other things, was kind of pointing out, you know, the images from Scripture, you know, say the suffering servant,
Yes.
or Jesus, you know, dying on the cross, Jesus, our kind of lens, our model of what God is like, wounded, suffering, and then when he's resurrected, the wounds are still there. You know, in the story of Thomas, you know, where he asked him to feel his wounds. And so, you know, it's kind of reflecting on this question, you know, what does it mean to be whole? You know, if our resurrected bodies might include our wounds, our limitations, you know, how does that change the way we think about healing? And so, so disability theology seeks to understand and interpret the gospel in relation to the experiences of people with disabilities. It highlights the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, regardless of ability, and challenges exclusion, and advocates for welcoming all individuals into religious communities. Disability is viewed not as a deficit, but as a meaningful part of human diversity in spiritual life. And Iceland brings out, you know, the Eucharist, where in a sense, you know, we're consuming the body of Christ, the wounded healer. And so, you know, even for Christians who follow this, you know, this wounded Messiah, it can be hard for us to make that shift. Like we gravitate towards those images of perfection and symmetry, and so.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm curious. I haven't read that book. I haven't even heard of it, honestly. Does she talk at all in there? Do you know, Carey, about? I'm thinking about all the healing stories where Jesus, people want, and Jesus seems to agree that removing their condition is restorative. That,
Yeah.
So, I don't even know if my question is making any sense.
No, that is something that I've thought about too, and I think there's a natural
There's something
tension
wrong,
there.
but
How I think some disability theologians address that issue is that there's sort of an acknowledgement of the reality that society limits these people because of their disabilities, and therefore by healing, you know, that condition, there is the ability now for them to be more fully welcomed into the community, and in some cases for them to be able to live independently or provide for themselves and their families.
It's a sign of our broken world, the fact that they need to be
Sort of, yeah.
I
healed.
mean, I think about, the lepers especially who were pushed out, for medical reasons. But I also think too about some of the healings that the healed was an agent in their own healing. I think about the bleeding
Yes.
woman who comes after Christ for, and then I think about his question, Jesus' question, do you wish to be healed? Do
Yes.
you want to be healed? So that's an so that it's not, as examples of, okay, perhaps that is also another, the quote unquote disabled or that the ostracized or is given agency is part of their own healing.
Yeah, I think
some
that's
stories.
important. And yeah, I think it's hard partly because we're coming at these stories from our 21st century,
Yeah.
much more, aware when around these issues, perspectives. And there are aspects of some of the stories that, we might find somewhat troubling or at least questionable. And I think that's where, we need to sort of just pause and let's talk about it. Let's explore this. Yeah, I know from some of the reading we did with Augustine, he apparently imagined in heaven or in the afterlife, everybody would be I forget what age it was, maybe 30 or something, they would be of a certain, the peak physical age or whatever with and they would have, all their faculties and, the bodies would be healed. And again, this disability perspective sort of pushes back on that and questions, what is wholeness? Yeah.
So when I lived in Syria, I didn't see any handicap. No one in wheelchair, no one in crutches. I honestly didn't think they existed, but they also didn't have anything in support of it. There was no ramps. It was step down, step up, stairs. Elevators were a little creepy. And I think about what you're just talking about. The only way someone could be able to be out in society is to be able to meet what society is saying, showing them, because they didn't have that option. So.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the interviews that I did as part of this project was with Morris. I can't say his last name, but you may have met him.
But I don't think that's.
Okay, right. Who is originally from Africa and has been adopted by a family here in Staunton. He's blind, not from birth, but he apparently had, I think it was glaucoma or pressure in his eyes, and the family couldn't afford the treatment, and so he's apparently completely blind. And he did say that things are much better here as far as accessibility, and there's very little in the way of the sort of basic accommodations that you now find here. Doesn't mean it's perfect here, but I'm trying to remember which country he's from, but there's just a more of a callousness, that's the way he described it, to disability. So speaking of which, this actually kind of transitions to the slide. So the ADA was this extremely important piece of legislation, 1990, George W. Bush signing there, which so many of things that we now take for granted, the spaces with the little wheelchair symbols and the cutaways and the sidewalks and ramps and all those things were not necessarily commonplace, before this. And so this was a huge kind of sea change, not only in the sort of, practical infrastructure, changes, but in our sort of societal consciousness around these issues. So it included jobs, schools, transportations, and all public and private places that may be accessible to the general public. However, unfortunately, I would say, many churches and religious organizations successfully lobby to be exempt from ADA regulations, and therefore the legislation generally does not require churches to comply with ADA standards. Despite that, many churches, including Trinity, have made considerable efforts and considerable expense to make their spaces more accessible, which, you know, given in many cases the ages of the buildings is no, you know, small feat.
What were the reasons why they lobbied against it? Or what were the reasons and the justifications, which might be, I'm guessing,
Right.
cost was the reason. What were the justifications they were giving?
My understanding, the justifications was more in terms of, you know, kind of keeping government out of
Right.
church,
Separation of church.
separation, and, you know, not having the federal government take a, you know, heavy hand when it comes to church affairs. But I think a big part of that was, I mean, you could say, you know, lack of, or not wanting to spend the resources, or maybe not it being a high enough priority. You know, if you think about like how many churches got a new, you know, fancy audio system, but maybe, you know, didn't invest in a new ramp or something, you know. I'm not, you know, that
Yeah.
sounds judgmental, but
Didn't Congress exempt itself from the ADA?
I don't know. I mean, is that, have you heard
They
that?
did.
Oh,
They did.
really?
Yep.
Right.
Wow.
So, why does all this matter for us here today? So I would argue that the priority that congregations place on creating hospitable spaces, liturgies, and programs for disabled persons is not merely a nice thing. If budgets and staffing allow, the authenticity of our Christian witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ is at stake, I would say.
Well, you're limiting your community, you're limiting your audience, you're defining it in a narrower way. All of these people can't come in because we didn't make it accessible. We're only gonna have these people. So,
And
not
there's-
realizing what you're
yes.
doing, you're,
And there's sometimes this sort of like chicken versus the egg effect, I think, where, you know, we look around and, well, I don't see that many disabled people, you know, like maybe it's not that big of a concern. Well, maybe there's a reason.
I used to work for the Savings Bond organization,
Uh-huh.
and all of our paperwork, all of our forms, everything was only in English. So if you could read English, you could fine. Well, then we had someone come in who was Hispanic, and they're like, do we wanna sell it to everybody? Isn't it our interest to sell savings bonds? Not everyone in the United States really deals in English.
Right.
And if we had the form in a different language as well, maybe we could sell to more people, and that's what we wanna do, right? Well, see, we had a bunch of people in charge who were, that was, or yeah, it was their only language, so they're like, oh, we do wanna sell. And there are people in the US who speak another language, oh yeah.
So
You know, it was just, they didn't recognize,
right. So
that's what,
whether it's the right thing to do, kind of for its own sake, or
yeah.
for
we
more
were
pragmatic
doing it as a
concerns.
business.
And I think, you know, the
But we
same
couldn't
applies to
see-
churches, because, I
Yeah.
mean, how many of our churches are declining in attendance, and so,
And people
What-
are aging, they become more disabled, right?
yes.
And so are you then kind of excluding, not realizing that the church might be excluding older people because it's more difficult
Right.
to access the church?
Right. Let me check the time real
No more than 15 minutes.
quick. Okay, so I may have to kind of speed along here. So, the reason why, that I feel like this is essential is because Jesus' life and teachings present a radical reversal of norms and priorities. I've listed here a number of, you know, kind of short sayings from the Gospels that I'm guessing most of you recognize. That, can everyone see this? Blessed are the poor, the meek shall inherit the earth, take the lowest place, the greatest among you, you will be your servant, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. And then, of course, the example of washing feet, taking the role of the servant, despite Peter's.
He looks really bad.
Yeah, he's very unhappy about this. And represents a lot of us, I think, in that. And this quote from Bonhoeffer: the exclusion of the weak and insignificant, the seemingly useless people from everyday Christian life and community may actually mean the exclusion of Christ. And that kind of brings to mind Matthew 25, and you know, when did you see me? What you've done to the least. And then a number of different images or metaphors from the New Testament, the body of Christ, where the foot can not say to the hand, and you know that all the pieces of the body are essential, and the weaker members of the body are specifically singled out as indispensable. In Galatians, we have the diverse body of believers all clothed with Christ, and therefore there's no distinction between Jew or Greek, male or female, and I would add able-bodied or disabled-bodied. And then also from John, this image of the church as a single vine out of which many branches grow. And each of the branches are commanded to love each other without conditions. Jesus' values and worldview, of course, didn't just sort of come out of a vacuum. They came out of his Jewish faith and tradition, where all creation was made by God and proclaimed to be very good. Human beings have been made in the Imago Dei, the image of God, which, you know, is this revolutionary theological concept that, you know, kind of gives basic human dignity to all people, regardless of their ability, regardless of their skin color. And God, you know, throughout different stories in the Hebrew Bible, gives special care and protection to the most vulnerable, including strangers, widows, and orphans. God liberates those in bondage and prohibits, there's specific commands where people are prohibited from abusing or taking advantage of the deaf and blind. And then God regularly uses people with disabilities. Think, you know, Moses, who is slow of speech, and what, you know, Mephibosheth, who is crippled. There's Isaac, who has the limp, and then the many barren women who, in that society and in many societies, including today, to be barren what was considered a disability. So that is sort of the first half. This could quite easily be a two-parter. But moving on more specifically to Trinity, I didn't realize Trinity was actually apparently founded to aid widows and orphans. And we are this vital hub for the community and hosting all the various events and gatherings throughout the year, including Alcoholics Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous. And of course the weekday noon lunch program, and then special mission work to Haiti and Honduras. So obviously, you know, a very kind of socially conscious congregation.
I will say, and AJ, correct or clarify me if I'm, but the aiding of widows and orphans really comes from the Church of England tradition too, which then was carried over into the Episcopal Church here. That idea, that's why we use the word parish instead of church often, because the call of the church is to take care of the community around it, especially in the Church of England, when there was not a lot of separation between church and state, still isn't, but that is kind of part of that, what that comes from, is that tradition of this.
That's
this
interesting.
Is the call of the church in community.
That's interesting, and I'm
Historically,
guessing
yeah.
there wouldn't have been a lot of the secular social organizations,
Right.
you know, during that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. You may or may not be aware that Trinity started a memory cafe, which originally met here, but eventually moved to the Staunton Library for more space, I believe. But it's
And easier to access.
Oh, yes, yeah. I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense. So it's a group specifically for people with dementia, and where they can kind of gather together in a supportive environment. Meets monthly on the third Thursday of the month in the afternoon. So this is, sorry, I didn't format it for the screen apparently.
My Google slides are trying to read your PowerPoint slides.
Sorry.
No worries.
So this is from the website. It's actually from the welcome page. So it mentions the dignity of every human being and all these different categories, but I've bolded a few, the physical or mental ability it mentions specifically, and we believe that God delights the diversity of creation, and so do we. So kind of resonating with that, with the creation story and this idea of all being created in the image of God, and that we welcome and value people regardless of ability. So these were the interviews that I did as part of the project. That's Morris, who I mentioned earlier, Muffy Newell, who was a major force in Trinity's efforts towards accessibility, and then of course AJ and Carey. So just to give you a little bit of the background of the recent years, as Trinity has sort of pushed forward with these efforts. So in 2022, just 3 years ago, Muffy, along with a handful of other concerned members, began meeting to take a look at the current state of Trinity's accessibility. And by the spring of the following year, they formed an accessibility committee that started taking some walkabouts, where they literally would walk about the campus and the grounds and look at, the different issues, related to accessibility. This is an old postcard that I found online. Man, they let the ivy get out of hand.
That may be why we have so many mortar problems now.
So these were some of the more significant issues that were identified by these walkabouts. So terrible handicap access. That was from the notes. Entering the parish house, which I guess is this building. Yeah. Confusing signage, poor lighting, parking challenges, locked access doors, decaying sidewalks with difficult turns, lack of buzzers for people needing assistance, lack of benches, lack of closed captioning or live stream services, lack of a handicapped bathroom in the main church building. And so, for those of you who have been here for a while, you probably already know that some of these can be checked off, which is exciting. And so these are some of the improvements that have been made since that committee formed. So we have a rail added to the front steps of the sanctuary. We have these hearing assistant devices for people who are hard of hearing. We've started putting out the blue cones for people, yeah.
Sorry. I think this is a really accurate picture, and the only reason I know about this is because of my ankle surgery.
Yeah.
It's no longer a drop-off zone, it's a park zone for people that are hard of walking. So, because we were usually at the end, it was difficult for me to find a place for him to drop me off near the thing.
I don't think all of those signs say drop-off zone. I think there's only supposed to be one that says drop-off zone. And that's supposed to be right in the center.
Yeah, but people, maybe because it's the same color, people just tend to park. So,
Yeah, well, okay, I can
That's-
explain more about that, but I don't wanna eat up your time.
yep.
So, and the way Muffy, her sort of short take on this process was that, you know, initially when the group kind of went to the leadership and to the, I guess, congregation, and I will say I was not here during this time, so this is all sort of secondhand. But she described some initial resistance, which, you know, is understandable because all this stuff takes a lot of money. But that a survey was developed, and once the survey went out and, you know, data was collected and feedback, that helped kind of convince the powers that be that, you know, this was a significant challenge that we wanted to rise up to meet. And as many of you know, Trinity applied for and received a VA 250 grant, which was a major multi-$100,000
$560,000.
grant that was then more than matched by the congregation and donors in the Generation to Generation campaign. And as AJ said, we will also improve accessibility for those with mobility issues, create directional interpretive signage, and install an accessible bathroom in the church. So that's coming.
Yes.
Or is that?
It's done.
Flush away.
Oh,
Yes.
right, okay.
It's done.
Yeah, it's great.
Awesome. And then,
Speak.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
And then the sidewalks.
That's,
have-
yeah.
To be rerun.
Yep.
Quick question, just because we have a son that tends to always need to go to the bathroom sometime during the service, can you hear?
Great lengths we're going to and at great expense to soundproof.
Okay, I guess before I send them down there, I want to make sure that it doesn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Poor guy. Yeah.
Okay.
So, so there's sort of this myth amongst some that, you know, people with disabilities, church probably, you know, church, faith, spirituality maybe isn't as important to them as it is to the rest of us. And that's definitely not true at all. The data suggests it's actually the opposite. If anything, it's more important than the normate among us. But statistically, people with disabilities are significantly less likely to actually attend church. So there's sort of this disconnect between the desire for a faith community and the actual people showing up. And the reason why, to put it simply, is that the dominant model of church has not been designed with them in mind, and so there are these issues of accessibility. And so this question of, are our churches offering a protest and an alternative to societal norms, or are we just a mirror image to those norms? I'm gonna have to somewhat speed through these. I hate to do it, but just for time's sake. Our churches are not immune to ableism. In any congregation, there are countless, often unspoken patterns of social conduct in the realms of worship, formation, and fellowship, the way we do things here. This is a pretty long quote, and we're short on time, but the basic idea is that, you know, we are people of faith, yes, but we're also human beings, and we fall into some of the same patterns that any other group does in terms of who we give social capital to. It tends to be those who are charismatic, who are attractive, who are kind of check the boxes that human beings automatically, kind of reflexively respond to, and sometimes we see people who don't fit those categories as sort of, they harm the unity of the group somehow. They're we kind of need to put them out on the periphery. going beyond inclusion to belonging. And so the main idea of this presentation that I wanted to get across is that inclusion and accessibility is critical and essential, but it's not enough. That you can have the new bathrooms, the new ramps, the new signage, all of that is again essential. It doesn't necessarily mean that the people will feel like they belong. It might help get them there. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to feel like they're truly a part of things. This quote from John Swinton: "People need to be concerned when you are not there. Your communities need to feel empty when you are not there. The world needs to be perceived as radically different when you are not there. Only when your absence stimulates feelings of emptiness will you know that you truly belong. Only when your gifts are longed for can community truly be community." And so, making this switch from seeing people with disabilities as the sort of category of people that we need to make some accommodations for and, kind of make things a little bit easier for them, to seeing them as people who offer gifts, people who have unique abilities and gifts that they can offer to the community. And also this idea that for all of us, it's this basic human need to be needed. Like, we all need to be needed. And if we're not asking people with disabilities to take on leadership roles or to, be a reader, just basic things that like sometimes we think, oh, we don't want to burden someone, we don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. But what we might be doing instead is making them not feel a part of things. And we're not getting their perspective. We're not getting their gifts that they offer. And this is a resource that I'll have links to if anybody wants to explore, that was put together by the Vanderbilt Kennedy School, which focuses on these issues. They have all these different suggestions for creating a more welcoming and hospitable church environment for those with disabilities. And what I want you to notice is that only one of them, the very bottom one, mentions physical accessibility. All the others are more about, how we, the sort of softer things, the way we interact, the services we offer, just sort of the human touch element of it. And again, if you want to look at these more closely, I've got links to them. And so a few specific recommendations for Trinity that I came up with. One is communicating and modeling an "it's okay" approach to worship and activities. I'm a yoga teacher, and if you've ever been to a yoga class, one of the things we often do at the beginning of the class is say, your body is your body. You know better than anybody else what you need, and so I'm going to be inviting you to take part in this this class in different ways, and you are welcome to do that in whichever way is most comfortable for you. And so sort of taking that as a model of saying many people will be kneeling today. You might look around and people might be kneeling. Some of us may be able to go up to the for the Eucharist. Some may be able to sit at the railing. Others of us may be standing or sitting. Some of us may need to get up and move. And just sort of having this sense of it's okay to do what you need to do to be comfortable in this space. So that's one. Technology. Morris helped me become more aware of how websites and newsletters, things like that, can be formatted in ways that don't require him to have someone else read it to him. Right now, many websites, I think including Trinity's, he can only hear small amounts of the text of the website and the newsletter. It has to be formatted a certain way, and if the graphics don't have like a little description, then he doesn't know what's on the screen. So little things like that with technology could be looked at. Being mindful of sensory sensitivities. This could be anything from the volume of music, of the organ, for example, or to lights, to smells. For people who have these sort of, again, if you don't struggle with this, it's something you don't think about. So just sort of being conscious of it. And then finally being proactive rather than reactive, and not letting, I think down here there's something about not letting the perfect get in the way of the, what's the saying?
Good enough.
Yeah. So not feeling like, we have to do everything all at once or it's not worth trying. So just taking small steps. And then these are the resources. You can take these accessibility surveys. Some of you might have, over the years, taken like a sustainability survey where you kind of go through your home or your building and check off like things that you're doing or not doing. So there's similar surveys for disability, and then lots of other resources for creating a more hospitable community for all people. And Kara has access to this, and I can email it to anyone who wants it.
Maybe we'll put it online someplace, so that
Okay.
you can reach it, yeah. but we can
So
do that. Thank
I
you.
know that was a lot in a
Wow.
short time. I wish we had a little more time, but
Might need a follow-up at some point.
yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any thoughts or questions that came up for you?
I need to head on out.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
so much, Carey.
Thank you.
And
Really
I'm-
helpful.
And I've gotta head out with him too.
I
Thank
understand.
you so much. I was also gonna say something really quick before next week is All Saints. And so, we're inviting people once again, we did this last year, to bring in a picture or an object that has something to do with one of your saints, whether it's a family member or whether it's Joan of Arc or whoever, St. Francis, St. Augustine. And we'll have some conversation, I think, back in this space again, but next week for All Saints. So I encourage you, thank you so much.
Sure.
This has been really outstanding
Thank you.
and all the
Thank you.
facets.
I'd like to talk to you about the class you took, so
Yeah.
could I get your email address?